Here we are in 1618, the year marked at the top of this tombstone, and its heraldic crest with the twin-headed eagle and various symbols of a man who lived in Constantinople. This is the stone of Thomas King, the Reverend Thomas King, a scholar of the Church of England, who came to live here in the 17th century. So the Church of England persisted through the Reformation. It wasn't a new church, of course, but it was independent of mainstream European papal Christianity and flourished in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, who sent the chaplain to Constantinople with the Levant Company, and by the early 17th century, we have serious scholars coming out from the great universities to be chaplain here in Istanbul. Thomas King was noted as a literary man, and we're going to travel to the place today where his remains were buried. This stone was in fact removed from there in the middle of the 19th century and placed at the embassy chapel, now the chapel of the Consulate-General, St. Helena's. The Shishmaniolio residence, great Greek Room family. They built this mansion on Istiklal Caddesi. It serves as the residence of the Greek Consul-General and houses a library that was owned by a great priest here in Istanbul and bequeathed to the care of the consulate here. You'll notice this huge European flag flying over the residence. It's a little bit odd when you think of what Greece is experiencing as a result of modern history. But here it is, flying its European flag. It's a beautiful house and beautifully restored in recent years. And it's very, very grand inside. It's en route as we go up to see the Reverend Thomas King's grave.
On the way up to visit Thomas King's grave, we passed the French Consulate-General.
It's one of the 2 buildings in Istanbul, 3 buildings actually. But you see, unlike the Greek consulate, it has a somewhat smaller European flag. It's quite surprising. The Greeks really overdo the European Union bit. But this was a TB hospital where people came, often died, and then were just carried across the square, across Taksim Square, to be buried in the cemetery next door. Hagia Triada from outside looks very grand. It's recently been restored. We were fortunate to get in there on the Feast of the Transfiguration, one of the great high days in the Greek and Anglican calendars. Father King, Thomas King, when he was walking out this way to do funerals, he would have passed this site in the countryside, but the church, of course, was only built in the 1860s when Christ Church, the main English church, was built. And here it stands, only very few attend, a handful of people one only sees in this place. And across the square, we leave the wonderful stone and dressed stone of Hagia Triada. We see the new mosque in Taksim with 2 lovely minarets rising high into the sky. It is a sort of statement about modern Turkey in the sense that it's the concretization of the city. So you have on the one hand a lovely stone building and on the other hand a concrete mosque that had to be built at least in the same proportion as Hagia Triada, if not bigger and taller. And farther along, on the square itself, is the Republic monument. And we're going to look at that monument now. The great monument to the Republic of Turkey. On the far side, you see Ataturk leading in this existential struggle for the identity and independence of the new republic in the 1920s. But on this side, we see Ataturk, bronze, with all those allies and ministers in the First Republic, and notice the ladies included in the statues. The women were part of the new world. And Turkey, of course, was ahead in having women in senior positions in banking and academia. So it's rather interesting that in this bronze you have women included, marking the foundation of the Republic. So many ways Turkey was enlightened and ahead of other countries in Europe. It's set in very fine pink stone, and green marble. We pass this on our way to Taksim Square proper.
Taksim Square.
It's not very big. Gezi Park is a part of the square. We've come from Thomas King's tombstone up Istiklal Caddesi past the Greek Consul-General's residence, the Shishmaniolu Megaro, to Hagia Triada Church built in the 1860s and its wonderful decoration, to the cement mosque that has been built on Taksim Square recently, and into the garden with all these lovely oleanders around, pink oleanders. Now this is the site of the cemetery where from the 16th century, well actually the 14th century, up to the middle of the 19th century, Western Christians and others were buried. So in the early 17th century, Thomas King, his remains were brought here and buried. Now those remains, it's a bit of a mystery. We think they remain here under this ground in this little leisure garden. The stone, of course, was brought to the chapel, and other tombstones were brought to the new cemetery in the middle of the 19th century. But this is Taksim Square, and this was the site of the Beaulieu Cemetery, where our sainted scholar was buried. These are the lawns of Gezi Park, and here we have trees and lawns, fountains, children's playground. It makes a very refreshing place in the middle of such a concrete jungle. Istanbul has rather overshot itself in developing as a concrete jungle in the last decade or so. Happily, this garden of Gezi Park has been conserved as a lung of natural beauty in the midst of the city. And here at the end of our journey is the resting place of Thomas King. We live to perpetuate his idea of a civilization, a Christian civilization, for which his chaplaincy stood and continues today, so many centuries, 16, 17, 18, 19, 24, exactly 4 centuries following his death. We are here on the anniversary of his death, and we stand for all that he stood. Catholic Christianity, free of the papacy and free of Protestant sectarianism.